to be mindful of the time.
Yep. Okay, welcome. To those of you who have joined us, I think we're going to be having some others join us as we proceed. This is Carolyn Jacobs with WGBH, and thank you for joining us on this gorgeous summer afternoon. This is a recorded conversation around advancing project-based learning for Massachusetts school administrators. And the session is sponsored by WGBH Education and PBS LearningMedia. Oops, jumped slide here. This webinar is part of a PBL webinar series that we initiated last spring here at WGBH, and we hope the series continues. This is the third. The first two were for educators, and we had the great pleasure of working with Susie Boss, who is an author of over 20 books on project-based learning, and she has a couple of very recent ones, and she's on the faculty of PBL Works, previously known as the Buck Institute. And she was the lead presenter on the webinars, and really, we were really impressed with her work and the reaction from the attendees. And as an aside, the first of those webinars, we marketed it only to Massachusetts teachers, and we had over 1,000 teachers register for it. So we knew that there was a lot of interest in this topic. I'm curious if any of you have heard of PBS LearningMedia, and if you know if your staff is taking advantage of it. If you have any comments or questions about that, please put them in the chat box. It is a free educational service that's a co-production of WGBH and PBS. Educators and students can access thousands of standards-aligned resources, many of which are produced by WGBH, and draw from our iconic programs such as NOVA, Masterpiece, American Experience, Frontline, etc. And I'll be back on at the end of the session to share a little bit more information about LearningMedia and also some opportunities that for your staff to work with WGBH. We involve teachers in just about everything we do. So I keep jumping slides here for some reason. Must have a heavy thumb here on the arrow. All right, so today's conversation is led by Alec Wyeth, who I've had the pleasure of working with now on 2 webinars, and hope we keep going. It's great to have you as a partner, Alec. And also he is joined by Larry Weathers, who was previously a director of science for many years in Arlington Public Schools and is now serving as a PBL coach. And then also Mike Crowley, who's a technology and engineering teacher at Norwood High School, works closely with Alec and has a lot of experience with PBL. Excuse me, again it jumped. Okay, here we go. We encourage you to interact with each other and the panelists in the chat box. We reserve the microphone just for the presenters. And there will be a series of open-ended questions to make this as conversational as possible. And there will be large chat boxes that are opened up for each of those questions that Alec poses to you, so that, and then we can keep your responses organized. We get transcripts of all the chats, and we'll be able to go through that and send along some bullet points afterwards. In the lower right-hand side of your screen, you can see a file name, PBL Resources, and you can download that PDF document that has links to lots of resources that the presenters have suggested and that also I pulled together from WGBH. So I'm now going to turn it over to Alec to get us started. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry it's such a beautiful day outside. We probably have a few more participants and have a little bit more livelier discussion, but we'll go with who we have. Alina, Kathleen, and Kim, welcome, and we look forward to chatting with you a bit about the topic here. So what I thought I'd do is just to kick things off with a little brief definition of project-based learning. It's from PBL Works, just so we all know, have maybe some common understanding as we move through the webinar. So it's a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or, here we go. What happened? How did that happen? Or a challenge. So that is just sort of a foundation for us. And then in preparing for this, the panelists sort of talked about, we might want to make a distinction between projects and project-based learning a little bit. So there is a difference. You know, the key characteristics that differentiate from simply doing a project, which, you know, a lot of teachers do projects, from engaging in meaningful and rigorous project-based learning is that PBL requires critical thinking, problem-solving, collaboration, and various forms of communication. Frequently is designed to answer a driving question or solve a community problem and create high-quality work. Students need to do much more than just remember something or recycle information. They need to use higher-order thinking skills and learn to work as a team. So when we talk about PBL, we should be thinking about this level of work and not simply, you know, project-type activities. So I hope that makes sense just as a starting point for our conversation. And this is the gold standard for PBL that comes right from PBL Works, you know, previously Buck Institute. So I'll let you all take a quick peek at that. I won't read all sections of it, but these are important. I think there's 7 of them. Important elements to any really good, deep, thoughtful, mindful project-based learning. So take a look at those, and then we'll talk about how do we do some of this work in our districts? How do we nurture it along? So that's the gold standard. And so we'll start with doing a quick poll about, you know, what's going on in each of our districts. So I'm going to start a poll right now for you that I'd like you to respond to. And you should see several options. You can choose more than one option if you would like, if that's appropriate. So I'll ask our viewers to go ahead and make their selections here so we can do a little dipsticking. And I'm assuming everybody can see this, so we can talk about it a little bit. So we have 3 respondents, so it looks like everybody's registered here. I'll do one for where we are in Norwood. So, you know, 3 folks are saying it's really happening at the middle school only, which is kind of interesting. High school only, elementary only, or maybe happening in both places. And then 3 of us are saying it's happening to some degree at each level. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Larry and Mike, I don't know if you have any comments or observations there about the poll, but no one has selected that last button, which is sort of my passion and where I would love to see everybody end up. We've set the expectation that every student will participate in one or more project-based learning activities or events each year, you know, so we as several districts aren't quite there yet. But there is stuff happening, which is the good news. So I'm going to end this poll and move back to our slides. If there are any
Alec,
thoughts
if I can offer
that
one
people...
thing?
Yeah, sure, Mike.
So, Alec, as I look
ahead.
at that, I'm wondering if, you know, we saw there was more PBL work at the middle and high school level. I wonder if that's being influenced by the fact that, for middle and high school, we have a standard curriculum, the Project Lead the Way curriculum. I wonder if that's why, we're seeing more PBL work at the middle and high school levels. That would be interesting to see how many districts are actually using PLTW now.
Yeah, Project Lead the Way, yeah, is a really great organization for advancing a lot of this project-based learning. Middle schools, it makes sense to me as an educator, administrator, because, you've got teams working together, and oftentimes they have a little bit more common planning time available to them to plan for more in-depth, maybe even interdisciplinary projects. So our participants should feel free to add information in the chat sort of section if you want to clarify anything we're saying or add to anything. Feel free to comment in the chat section. So let's move along here. So the essential question for today is, how can we as administrators advance project-based learning system-wide? I think that's our goal. And so it'd be worth having a conversation about that. And so we've designed a couple of questions to get people's input, and I'm going to collect your input in a minute here. And so the two questions I'd like us to think about is, what barriers have we encountered in implementing project-based learning, and how, whoopsie, we got too many hows there, how have you handled and worked around them? So I'll ask you to respond to that in a minute, and then yeah, let's do that one first. So what are our barriers here? So if I could ask the participants to sort of jot down their thoughts about barriers in our chat box here. It says chat 6. That would be great. So go at it, participants. What are the barriers? You type at the bottom there, yep. And then hit return. And Carolyn's added the question just so people can respond directly to that question. Yeah, Kathleen's thrown up some classics, a schedule to presumably meaning time for people to get together, to work together, and do some planning. Time for some substantive PD. Yeah, Carolyn, you're a little ahead of us. The resistance is the next poll item, I think, the next chat box. Any other barriers? Yeah, that's a good one, Mike. And Kim's saying enough of the right materials. College, 11, 12 is tough. We have early college, common apps.
I certainly agree with Kathy's comment that the need for a comprehensive PD is it's something we have to think through, and it's an important strategy, and we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Where to fit it in the curriculum. Yeah. Yeah. Any other barriers? Yeah, assessment, Chris. Yep. How do we grade project-based learning in a way that is consistent with our grading systems? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Lack of confidence in the work. So that's sort of a function of professional development, I guess, and building up that level of confidence. Yeah, definitely confidence is a barrier. Teachers worry about failing, you know. Project-oriented too often. There doesn't have to be a thing. There doesn't have to be a thing, yeah. So Chris, I'm assuming your comment sort of is talking more about the process as opposed to the product. When you say it doesn't have to be a thing, it can be very, very process-oriented, which can be frustrating for people, I suppose. That might be a barrier. Oh, I see. Yeah. 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 Okay, as Carolyn mentioned, we'll sort of be sharing some of this with other people. It'll be part of the record. So if there are any other barriers, throw them up there now before we move on. I think it's good to know what are our obstacles in doing this work, and then we can talk a little bit about how do we work around those obstacles in a coming up slide. You know, so hold on to some of this information. Sometimes, well, I might just put this in here, space and room to do the projects. You know, sometimes you just don't have the proper setting for what you need to do. State testing, yeah. Yeah. All right, Carolyn's added a way to keep the thread going if you want to. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, I'm going to sort of move on, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, Mike's added, you know, it should be part of the district plan. If it's not part of the plan, then they say maybe that's a barrier for teachers, saying this isn't a major focus for us. Why put all the time and effort into it? That's a good point, Mike. All right. Okay, I'm going to go back to our slides and sort of take the conversation to the next level a little bit. So it might be interesting to hear from folks, where in your system or school have you found the greatest and least resistance to project-based learning? Is it happening at certain grade levels? Is it happening in certain disciplines? So let's do a quick response to that question. If you could add that in there at the top, Carolyn, that'd be great. So if I can get the participants to respond to that, can have a little chat. Larry and Mike, feel free to chime in to what you see.
So if I may, Alec, and again, it's Mike Crowley. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. So, you know, I'm a pretty strong believer in the fact that PBL should originate and reside in the science department. You know, it has, due to a lot of factors, it's absolutely the nature of science. But also, you know, the whole notion of inquiry is so central to PBL. And then when we start doing things, you know, just the discussion of independent and dependent variables, I would encourage all districts to make sure that PBL should be firmly rooted in science. We've done that at Norwood High School with tremendous success. The opportunity, and Alec, you've been a big part of that, so thank you. But I mean, the opportunities for interdisciplinary, you know, collaboration, work between, you know, interdisciplinary classes are fantastic. So I am just a firm believer that you will have the greatest success if PBL is rooted in your science department.
Yeah. Yeah, so we got a couple. I certainly agree with Chris that math is a tricky area, and so that for me, it's always how can we get the math department, math teachers out of their rut, so to speak, so we can talk about some strategies coming up next, but let's think about that as we go through some of these places where there's resistance or not, Elementary level grades with MCAS testing, yeah, right. Yeah.
Wow, that's surprising, Kim. So the very seasoned teachers can't seem to see PBL as academic learning. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it might be this notion that project-based learning isn't sort of rigorous core content.
Right.
That may be a barrier. That perception that it's more like a project versus real project-based learning. So
Right.
you have to help people understand that project-based learning is in fact rich in content, linked to the standards, should be, and rigorous, and substantive. And it's a mindset that may be a barrier.
I would be interested for that one, Kim. With like, what are they maybe influenced by past projects? Do you think? I'll tell you, something interesting that I've seen in my years is, a lot of districts when they had a hard time turning the corner, if you will, from like old industrial technology to technology and engineering. There was a real education piece that had to go on there about all the factors that Alec just referred to.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we were working on this, I think most of us were in agreement that science and technology seemed to be sort of a ripe area for project-based learning, because especially technology, it's all about designing, building, testing, retesting, and so how do you, yeah, it's a natural fit, and certainly English areas of English and history should be a pretty easy fit too, but math is definitely tricky. All right, unless there are other thoughts about areas of resistance. As I said, I think yeah.
I think
go ahead.
Kim's comment about experienced teachers might be influenced by the fact that experienced teachers are probably more observant in a sense because they have past history to relate things to, and their experiences may very well see the kind of engagement that increases when kids involve themselves or get involved in PBL.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's move on. And as Carolyn mentioned, we can come back and continue to add to that if something occurs to you after the fact. So next question, what strategies have you found effective in advancing project-based learning in your district? So how can we all sort of chime in, help each other a little bit here around overcoming some of those barriers and points of resistance? Someone was going to say something? No. Okay. What specific steps have you taken and with whom? So let's move to the strategies chat here. And Carolyn, if you could slap up that question for people to refer to, that'd be great. Strategies. What are people doing to really get around the barriers and advance project-based learning? Authentic links, backward design, designed on transferable skills. Yeah. So, Chris, sounds like one way that you help to advance it is by giving people some authentic resources. When you say links, I'm assuming those are kind of resources for people to use to do backwards design. What other strategies? Yeah.
I'm having a little trouble with typing in here, so I can certainly mention that. Starting simply so that teachers don't get overwhelmed and expecting that they're going to have lots of questions, maybe some backstepping and then forward stepping, to just keep coaching them along, and then as they build that confidence, they'll continue to grow in that. We're seeing that in our 6th grade.
Yeah. That's a good point, Larry, because people sometimes look at project-based learning as really big and complex and almost unmanageable. And a lot of the places I've been, workshops I've been to, say just put that aside, start small. Just do something that's manageable for you and then build it up. Mike, you might want to talk about your sequencing a little bit in your courses about how you don't dive into the big project right out of the gate, right?
No, I agree, Alex, and that's a really important point. That's one of my big 3 that I'll talk about in my slide, is the importance of having a logical sequence of skill building, so that the students gradually get to the point where they can use all that higher level thinking that we want them to use, particularly creativity. So that a lot of thought has to go in that. And I'm just going to say, too, it's been my experience. Again, at NHS, we've had a lot of experience because I think we were very thoughtful. We did it over a number of years. But most importantly, at every turn, when we had the opportunity to put rigor into one of the courses within our technology and engineering course sequence, we always made sure that we put that extra rigor in there. For example, the capstone project for honors in college engineering is to replicate the Mars Pathfinder project outside, down the street, over this very hostile 1-mile course. So I think if it's very clear, and Larry, I think your point is right on, that you have to be patient and that you have to develop those faculty champions that are willing to take the ball and run with it. And I also agree, I think it was Chris and also Kim was saying earlier, the fact that it's probably your more experienced teachers that are going to be willing to, grab that ring and go with it. I think we have to do everything we can to make that easier for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask one last question, then we should probably move on. And, if folks have partners that they've used to sort of advance the cause, it might be great to throw those up on our chat box window here. If anyone's used like PBL Works and found their training to be really effective for folks to move the needle, let's hear about that and talk about that a little bit. So Kathy, I know you mentioned that the professional development is very important. So how do we deliver that professional development? Where's it coming from?
We have, in Arlington, we have used some partners such as the Concord Consortium and TURC and some MIT projects and the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, where they have outreach programs that will help teachers come in, and they will come into your classrooms with equipment and plan with you and strategize how to plan it with the teacher, and then be there holding your hand while you're engaging in it with the students, and then give you feedback and conversation about it afterwards. So that's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, good. yeah, these sort of think tanks are often great places. I used to do some work with Turk and EDC, and I'm not sure how much PBL training they do, but they may be deep into it. Concord Consortium's a great organization.
Yeah. I think
they do a lot of really interesting science and math work in particular.
Yeah, they do. I think that sometimes projects like what they offer, and maybe other project work within schools already, are PBL, but we don't talk about them that way. So, for example, in Arlington, we've had a fairly strong internship program that it's gone up and down from year to year, but the students who engage in that are really doing long-term projects, and they end up coming back and sharing those things. We don't call it PBL, but it's that in another name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've
Chris
also
mentioned
worked I'm sorry, Larry. I'm sorry.
Larry. Yeah, go ahead, Larry. I think we probably, all right, Mike, we probably ought to wrap this up and move on. But go ahead.
Certainly. Thank you, Larry and Alec. Just want to let everyone know, too, that we've worked quite a bit with Leamington, MIT, and they've been fantastic. They have a lot of educator resources, and, of course, they also provide, they'll fund projects if you, if you can move forward within their program. But they do have a lot of excellent resources, particularly related to, and it may be more for the inventing side, but they do have a lot of resources for educators that you can just sign up for.
Yeah, yeah. I just threw up Northeastern University. They are knee-deep in sort of internships and real project-based learning. I've not worked with them, but they might be worth investigating for potential trainers in PD. And Chris mentioned High Tech High. That's sort of a classic, a classic exemplar for project-based learning, and that's a good resource. So thanks for that, Chris. All right, I'm going to move on, and we're getting close to, we want to hear a little bit more about what's happening in a couple of our districts, and so we'll start off with Larry. Tell us about the exciting work that's happening in Arlington in a minute or so.
I will, as soon as my slide opens. Actually, I'm going to go to my my offline slides.
It should be up in front of you now.
Yeah, it's as I said earlier. I'm in a different time zone. Not really, but metaphorically.
Larry, this is Carolyn. You have dropped off out of the room. You don't appear in the presenter box anymore, so that's why. So if you're now an attendee, and I'm going to make you a presenter, and let's see if you're able to see the slides and advance them.
Okay.
While that's happening, I'm going to just skip ahead to Mike then, just for save some time, and then we'll come back and do Larry. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay, so Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of what you're doing and that might be helpful to others. Yep.
Thank you, Alec, and again, good afternoon to everybody. It's great to be here with you as part of this conversation. So I believe that there are 3 must-haves for effective project-based learning, and the first one is a clear understanding of the expectations, and we included the link there to the sample rubrics from PBL Works, and those rubrics are excellent. And I think it's really important that the students have a picture of what the end result should look like. For example, so a little bit about me, I'm a 29-year teacher. I actually started out teaching at the college level. I started out teaching in an Institute of Technology, and this is my 15th year at Norwood High School. But I have what I refer to as my video exemplar library. That's very granular. It's 100% based on previous student successful projects. So I can actually pull out a video for students where they can see the concept that was successful in a particular application, and then I have another video of the student saying exactly why that concept was successful in that application. The next most important must-have, if you will, and I spoke to this a little bit a few minutes ago, was the need for a logical sequence of skill development with an emphasis on placing concepts into context. And I always want you to be able to walk away with something you can refer to later. So in the resources file on the lower right, you can download a document that Carolyn put together that has the sample curriculum map for our engineering course that I'm providing. But I think that's a critical success factor for a PBL for sure. And I'll give you one example. In our course sequence, our skill development sequence, students are exposed to the concept of Ohm's law and intro to technology. So that's a very simple context that they place that concept into. But then the next year, when they're sophomores, they take the very same concept, which is Ohm's law, and they have to put that into a much more complex context, which is how do they get this rover vehicle, which they've created for the Technology Olympics, to be as energy efficient as possible. And then in their junior year, they take the very same concept again, Ohm's law, and now they have to apply that into the working of their diabetic pump and have 6 forms of energy conversion. So you can see that placing the concepts into context, of course, is a key part of project-based learning. And finally, a guiding framework that helps students organize their thinking and use a systematic approach. Again, I provided a sample checklist from one of my courses. And of course, in the world of engineering, we have the 8-step engineering design process, which is a wonderful guiding framework, if you will. If we can go to the next slide there, Alec, if you would.
Yeah.
Now, one of the goals of our program as well is I want all of our students, when they graduate, to approach problems the way that I do. And at Norwood High School, we refer to that as the philosophy of, thinking like an engineer. When you look at how an engineer approaches a problem, the first thing they're doing in their mind is they're quickly eliminating some potential causes. Then they get it down to 2, and then they start doing some testing, and they finally arrive at the root cause. That's one of our goals at Norwood High School, is that cognitive part, that thinking part, to be able to think like an engineer. Now, I realize that, this seminar today is about what do administrators need, or what can you do, what do you need to provide. So I would say, again, as a long-time practitioner, the first thing that you need to provide is dedicated lab space. I would recommend at least 900 square feet per lab. At Norwood High School, I have 2 900 square foot labs. They're used for different purposes, but they're both very involved in PBL. Dedicated funding is very important. 100 students can participate in intensive project-based learning for $3,000 a year. I don't think that's really very expensive at all. You can get a lot of miles if you select the right system. We use the VEX robotics system for a lot of our PBL. We can use it with the freshmen. We can use it with the sophomores. We can use it with the juniors and seniors. It's very age appropriate, and it's very cost effective for us. And my last point in terms of what administrators need to provide, and this came up earlier in our chat when we were talking about barriers, but it's very important to have dedicated PD time, and that's for teachers to work on the design, structure, and assessment of their PBL courses. Again, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Wyatt and Dr. Thompson at Norwood. We have had dedicated PD time, and it's had enormous impact on bringing PBL forward in Norwood High School. So those are what I would say are my 3 things that administrators need to provide. Note also to everyone that I provide my email address. If you have any questions after, I'd love to chat with you afterwards. But thank you for the opportunity to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for your perspective. Yeah, the PD time, I'm a big believer that if you give teachers time to do really good work, you will get really good work. The problem is just making sure that you have that quality time, because there's a lot of, training's one thing, but there's a lot of good materials out there from PBL Works and, the new Tech High that was referenced earlier. So these rubrics already exist. So it's not like, you need to train people on rubrics or developing rubrics. They're already out there. What they need is time just to put their heads together and say, okay, what can we do that's really engaging kids and that gets at the content that we care about and that we have to hit, in order for kids to do well on the MCAS, etc. You know, it's very doable in my mind. But anyway, let me jump back to Larry here. And Larry, tell us about some of the really good stuff happening in Arlington. It's really exciting, I think.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Alec. Yeah, we had an opportunity when because of our student population expansion, and we needed to open another building, and there was a decision made to make that a 6th grade only building, which gave us sort of a rare opportunity to start new. And so the whole program, in many respects, largely at the initiation of one of the principals, and with support from a lot of other people, to include project-based learning as an expected part of the academic program. And so in starting that new building, there was a project block designed that all teachers would engage in. It varied a little bit from every other day to once every 3rd day, but it involved all disciplines, all year, and in the beginning it started with some teacher discretion in the projects. And it involved such incredible projects that, and it went way beyond the science and math, even though I think it certainly starts there. One of the projects, as an example, was creating a school community garden where students really, they started by testing their soil, determining what was needed, how would they amend that soil, what kind of plants grew. They had perspectives that involved community needs and nutritional aspects, and they even included social aspects of concepts of food scarcity and food justice. And so that whole program really took over for the year, and the kids really got into it. Another group created a colony for Mars. So they looked at human needs and resources and technology, and figured out what would this community, what would this colony look like, and they designed it, you know, using the engineering process. And what surprised me was there were groups that from all of the other disciplines. One of the groups that was focusing on music, they were looking at different forms of rock and roll. They did opinion polls. They studied what those forms looked like, how they differed from each other. And in the ELA, they looked at pioneers in social action and the writings about them and the writings by them, people like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. And those were all things that were part of a real engaging conversation. So after doing that, you know, we realized there were still gaps, and we needed to improve some things. So there are revisions that are coming for next year. We're going to focus in trimester 1 on sort of a metacognitive skill building, where kids are understanding what makes a 6th grader tick, and how and what are some of the skills that you need to design an essential question, and then once you do, how do you do the research around it and organize yourself and teamwork, at the same time having some agency and independence, so that you know, you're not working under the direction so much of one teacher's idea, but you're using that teacher as a guiding force. It involves technology and media use, and then the plan is to move on more in content in trimester 2 and 3, and that will again be a multidisciplinary effort. You can move on to the next slide, please.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Yeah. No, that sounds awesome.
So
okay.
So part of that plan is to develop some PD for teachers to, and starting with how do we, or as teachers and educators, guide students into thinking about an essential question? you know, you start with maybe a question, and then you keep digging backwards until it becomes an essential question, and then how to answer that question. I think our realization is coming from the fact that in 6th grade, we're really starting a transition here for the kids as they proceed to a whole new way of being in school. They have many teachers now instead of just one, as they do in the elementary school. And there are other changes and evolution that those kids are going through, and we want to give them the basic skills so that they can jump into PBL projects without having to relearn those skills every year. If we can give them that introductory set of skills early, then they'll be much more ready to engage in content work. And so we're hoping to get that broad interdisciplinary content work again, and we have the full support of the administrators, including the superintendent, assistant superintendent, curriculum leaders. Thank you, Kathy. And so that's what the next phase of our exploration is. You know, with those 6th graders moving on to 7th grade, we're going to try to see how we can ramp that up for them by supporting the teachers to do that, and with all the ideas that people are suggesting here. So again, if there are any questions people would want to contact me about, my email is there, and I thank you for the opportunity to share some of this.
Yeah, that's excellent, Larry. It's really exciting. And nice participants, if you have a question for Mike or Larry, feel free to throw it up in the chat where they can see it, the chat on the right-hand side there, and they can respond to it. We're getting close to when we need to turn it back over to Carolyn, though. Larry, one thing that caught my attention in what you spoke to is the emphasis on metacognition side of project-based learning, which is so very important. It's not just about doing, I think one of our, maybe it was Chris that said it's not just about the thing, you know, it's about the process as much as anything else. Understanding yourself, understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are and what skills you need to scaffold your work. And Mike, you talked about scaffolding. Well, that's really important for any effective project-based learning, I think, to happen, is you've got to scaffold the learning for kids so that they, you know, they don't fail right out of the gate, or it's not too overwhelming right out of the gate, and build that skill set and build the model out from, you know, from a decent starting point kind of thing. So those are just some of my quick thoughts. I really love what you're doing. It'd be interesting, Larry and Kathy, if you could track those 6th grade and soon-to-be 7th grade students, that cohort's MCAS results and other testing results, and see how they do. Because your program sounds very immersive. I'm not sure, you know, maybe, Larry, you could speak to that a little bit. How much time really in the typical day is really invested in this kind of deep project-based learning and work? What do you think?
Well, as Kathy mentioned earlier, I think one of the turning points was the fact that in the 6th grade schedule, this PBL time is dedicated. It's a period, just like science and math and ELA and history are periods. Project-based work is a period during the day.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
And that focuses it, and it says, you know, kind of crudely, that there's no escaping this. You know, so let's figure out a good way to do this. And an interesting thing about something you just mentioned about how we scaffold this, what we hope is that each year we have to up our ante on the scaffolding, because the kids are different. They're different kids in 7th grade than they are in 6th grade. And so we can go further and further and further. And when they're in high school, you know, they should really be working independently, and the teacher should be there to facilitate whatever those students need. And so that's what we're hoping, you know, and we're in the beginning of our journey on that.
Yeah, yeah. All right, that's excellent. We're at 1:50, and I think, Carolyn, you might need some time to wrap things up here. So, and I don't see any other questions from folks about what Larry or Mike has said. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is what we were going to sort of try to talk to, but maybe this is something we can talk about next time. Or, you know, the assessment and portfolios piece. How do we keep track of all this great work that students do? And that would be an interesting topic for another time, I think. You know. But.
Yeah, Alec, I think let's take another couple of minutes and pull up the chat box about the follow-up if you want to advance to the follow-up slide.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Well, actually, let me go back there, yeah. So the next important question, actually the last question, is how would the participants like to follow up? Where is that? Let's see, must be. Yeah, there it is. What would be the most helpful way to follow up this webinar and advance the purpose and reach of project-based learning in your school or district, and ideally in the state? So if respondents could quickly respond to that, if that would be helpful to us. So here's the chat box for that question. What would be the most helpful thing to do next for you?
Yeah, and I'll add that I think that you know, WGBH may be able to play a role in this, depending upon the level of interest across the Commonwealth. You know, part of our mission, of course, is support educators in a variety of ways, and we really do a lot of focus on Massachusetts in particular and underserved districts. But maybe this is not the right forum, and maybe there's another way to continue this conversation. So we're interested in any feedback you have, and you'll have my contact information at the end. So if you have other thoughts or you don't get into the chat and you want to email me directly, that would be great. Thank you.
Misspelled student.
So
any other thoughts there? Throw them up before we move on. Yep. Larry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that my typing is still going one letter at a time. So I'm just going to say that I think what will be really helpful to teachers is to see some exemplars, to see student work, to see video. And as we can point to the references where those exist or where how we can add those, it will be very helpful for motivating teachers and for giving them ideas and strategies.
Yeah. So that sort of speaks to Carolyn's ideas that maybe that's where WGBH could be really helpful. Let's collect some of the really great stuff that's going on in the state and showcase it, you know. And I think places do that, like I mentioned Frank Locker's. I don't know if all of you have heard of Frank Locker, but every year they do a PBL celebration. I think it's at one of the local colleges nearby, I think Wheaton or someplace like that. You know, we need to do more of that and get people out to see it. And certainly stuff is seen in places like MassQ and elsewhere, but it'd be a great thing for WGBH to do, I think.
Yeah, and I had mentioned in the chat box that we hosted Boston Public Schools. They have an Excellence for All project that covers 4th through 6th grade, and they used, they came to GBH and we hosted a showcase of the projects in the atrium, and then in the very fancy auditorium that we have, we had kids up on stage. We had lots of Boston public educators and dignitaries from local government and the community. And it really was an impressive event. And everyone came away saying, yeah, we have to keep doing this. So, you know, we'll continue to talk. Funding, of course, is always the big question. Where does funding come to do classroom filming and curating? But, okay. All right, we're going to move on and wind down, and yeah, we're getting back.
I'll turn it over to you, Carolyn. Yep.
Great, great. All right, well, thank you, Alec, Larry, and Mike. We have a small crowd, but I think that everyone gained something, and I hope that it was a good experience for you to be part of this conversation. I had mentioned that this is part of a series. The recordings of the other two webinars that we ran this spring for teachers, those recording links should be in that document, the PBL resources document that you can download at the bottom of your screen on the right. And if they're not there, if I forgot or whatever, I'll send them out to you. And again, we had over 1,000 teachers register for the first one, several hundred for the second one, and Susie Boss from PBL Works was a big part of that. So another just mention and to encourage you to, if you haven't already, to familiarize yourself or figure out how we can help spread the word of PBS LearningMedia to your faculty. These are just some examples of collections of resources that are on the site. Again, it's free. If you're not familiar with PBS LearningMedia and you are familiar with Discovery, this is a very similar animal to Discovery in that it's a online library of educational resources, but we're free, and a lot of public media content. So these are just some examples of the content that you'll find. We're working right now with the World War II Museum in Natick and creating some very innovative student activities around using artifacts, life during World War II. Mm. And this is we're in year 4 right now of a project collaboration with NASA to develop Earth and space science resources for K-12 on topics such as the solar system, land formations, water, weather and climate, etc. And we're using NASA data, NASA imagery to create resources heavily involving teachers along the way in the whole process. New content is coming to PBS LearningMedia all the time. Some of you may have seen the recent American Experience broadcast of Chasing the Moon, and resources are up on the site from that. And when I say resources, the way we define a resource is typically a 2 to 5 minute clip, and it's contextualized with maybe a background essay, teaching tips, etc., to make it more than just the media, to give it more depth. We are very excited about a new production of WGBH Kids called Molly of Denali. This is an animated series featuring a character from Alaskan indigenous young girl named Molly. And the educational tie-in is there are resources up on LearningMedia now, and there will be many more coming, all around understanding informational text. And it's for elementary grades. All right, I wanted to let you know we do not have a list of all teachers in Massachusetts. No one has offered it to us, and we can't afford to buy it. So we communicate out to teachers who go to conferences or go to our webinars or whatever, but there are lots of teachers who've never heard of PBS LearningMedia, don't know what's out there, don't know what's free. And so any suggestions you have about communicating that, and then the opportunities to work with us. I'm really kind of the point person of teacher contact, and so I organize and recruit for focus groups and surveys. I involve teachers as co-presenters on webinars. At conferences, we're going to mask you with about 15 teachers. 4 of them will present with me at sessions. And so there are lots of opportunities to work with us, and how best to get the word out to your staff is kind of a question for me, but I'm very interested in making sure every Massachusetts teacher knows what's available to them and can avail themselves of opportunities to work with their local PBS station. This is an example. We have an after-school event that is going to be at the Tech Cooperative in East Norwood in September from 4 to 7. This is the second year we did this in collaboration with MassQ and MSLA, which is the School Librarian Association. And the event sold out at 100 people last year. We expect it to sell out again this year for teachers. And we're thrilled that Sarah Childress, who's a senior investigative reporter with Frontline, is going to be the keynote speaker, and she's right now finishing up a Frontline broadcast on the Flint water crisis that will be broadcast soon. So we are in a position of doing 3 to 5 is what we try to do in-person PBS LearningMedia training. So I've gone out to districts. Holyoke jumps in my mind right now, one of the recent places I've been, to do trainings for teachers. So often I'm part of a PD day or whatever. So if that's of interest to you in bringing us, inviting us in, or doing something virtual, you'll have my contact information. So I want to thank Larry, Mike, and Alec. Had a lot of fun putting this together. I hope it was a good experience for everybody. And wish you a wonderful rest of the summer. And this is my contact information. I will send out a follow-up email tomorrow with the recording link of this, as well as links to the resources. And thank you, and I'd like to wish you a wonderful day. I'll keep the chat box open for another minute, and Alec, if you have any final words, feel free to talk.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks to everyone, and please feel free to share the webinar when you get it emailed to you.